Okay, whoever is here, I welcome you to the Veil of Controversy, VALE, I think I mean, and it could be VIL, no pun intended. I have about 25 slides that I'll go through pretty fast. There is no intent. I got them in so that I have a permanent record of them and that you can see them and read them. I'll try to point out the important things, and the intent is to get through in a half an hour or less so that we have a lot of time to talk or to listen. And for that, I have to get shares. Let's see, I have to, what do I have to do?
Go to the little green thing on the bottom and
green
click
thing on the
share
bottom,
screen.
right? And then it'll tell me, here, green thing.
Right.
Now I have to get rid of this thing that says inbox.
Well, just pick on the tile.
I've got that. My tile is blocked. It's now there, and it's there. We did this once before. I rehearse fast. I click on the tile, and nothing's happening. It happened before. Oh, I clicked twice.
There it is.
There you go.
All right, and everybody sees this.
There you are.
Introduction there. Okay, and if you want the slides at the end, send me an email or bother any of us, will eventually get to me. The first of the, here we go. The first couple of slides are sort of basic points, which I underline what I want to say. Science is on the defensive because, especially because of the COVID novel, whatever it is, the novid. And I point out two things. One is cultural evolution. Most of us are very familiar with biological evolution, but people can change opinions, and these opinions are based on past developments, past activities, but it doesn't take 100,000 years. It may take a year, it may take a week or a month. So cultures, what I'm implying is that there is a foundation, there's a basis, there is something underneath when other things happen. And it isn't necessarily biological, and it can happen fast. Most of you maybe have heard of the phrase cultural evolution. You may not have heard of cultural fertility, which is kind of the same thing. It says that people come out of more or less fertile ground. And that gets this principle that leaders really follow. Leaders try to figure out or sense which way things are happening, and then say we're the leaders, or already appear to be the leaders, but they're the better followers, but they're following a group, they're following an evolved behavior pattern, or in this case, a suddenly grown, well, I shouldn't say suddenly, slowly grown behavior pattern, because let's say about 40, 50 years ago, DuPont was advertising their company and their product, something like, I think it was them, better living through chemistry. And people looked at that as a positive thing. Today, nobody would put out that kind of an ad because they're scared of chemistry. Next slide is one of my long dead mentors. Any of you who either have gone to medical school or know people who have may know a character called Paracelsus. It was his nickname, if you call it that. He had a real name, which was Johannes Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. All of that, and maybe more.
Bombastus.
Well, look, I get it from the internet. I'm assuming it's correct, but he's known as Paracelsus. His dates are somewhat similar, a generation after Leonardo da Vinci. I occasionally write that he was contemporary with him, but way back then. And he is referred to as the founder of modern toxicology. But basically, he said one thing that they teach the doctors today, and you can see for good reason: dosis facit venenum. The dose makes the poison. I convert that to numbers matter. How much matters? And you would think it would be obvious, but we are constantly today and always violating that command, especially when we deal with food and beverage. We don't count. We don't want to count, and that will come to that. Anyway, this says a little about where he was a professor of medicine, and that he translated the books into German. The next slide is, no, it's this one. Here it is. This, oh, there should have been another one in here. Did I get this out of order? Oh, I put this in order today. That's one. I didn't see that. I didn't do this one either. Philosophy, but it says no one thing is all important. For the fatalists, class A, no. The we control everything, class C, no. And this should have said things that happen. And I may not have saved that slide, which bothers me, but I did a lot of work this morning on it. And it then requires me to tell you what it says or what it's about. And I think I can do that from a little notes and memory. And I'll get it in the slide, so anybody who asks for the slide will get it. It says what I said. Paracelsus tells us numbers matter. But if numbers matter, it doesn't start there. That's just the beginning. And I have 7 topics that I note how numbers matter. So if you're going to use them at all, they've got to be used this way. Or there could be more than 7. But the first one is probability. A thing that has a 10% or a 1% probability is not the same as a 50% probability. We see lots of COVID data, and we are trying to estimate things like that. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The second is proportion. 1 case in 1,000 is not the same as 200 cases in 1,000. The third is precision and accuracy. Averages are not media, and ranges matter. A thing may average 500 somethings, and it could be anything between 300 and 700, or it could be between 499 and 501. Ranges definitely matter. The third is costs, and that had 3 subcategories under them. One is economic cost, second is environmental and health cost, and the third is the psychological cost, where we will get more fear or more comfort from a particular action. That is really hard to quantify, but it can't be forgotten. And in this case, it's very important. In the case of science, chemistry, plastics, numbers. The 5th of the 7 is the question of units. It's easy to confuse units. It's sometimes done in the same document where some temperatures are given in Celsius and some in Fahrenheit. And I add the word omission. Omission. Sometimes the units are omitted. This may be deliberate, it may be accidental, but if we don't know how many of what, we can't talk about how many. The 6th of the 7 is the disease, in quotes, of percentitis, the inflammation of the percent, or the use of percents to deliberately or accidentally disguise real values. I'm driving twice as fast as you, or 50% faster. Am I breaking the speed limit? You don't have a basis for decision. You don't know how fast one or the other is driving. So percents are very easy and can be very deceptive because people get excited if they're large numbers. 300% increase in. I hope we are used to reading things that are percentized and used to looking beyond the number for the actual numbers to get an idea of the relative importance. And the last of the 7 is distortion. I use the phrase curve bending. Sometimes it's done with a scale of a curve. And then selection or cherry picking, we know about, but we don't always recognize it. Numbers can be distorted. They can be bent to prove what somebody wants to prove, which goes back to another thing that may have been on this also. We believe what we want to believe is true, which means reporting numbers is a very difficult task, dealing with numbers, selecting the numbers. You can't put them all down. You don't have enough space. You don't have enough time. So how do you select? Well, I try to do it honestly because I think all of us would feel that way, but not everybody is that way. And especially when you get into the psychological counting, the relative importance of fear and comfort. And that gets a little bit, the thing down on the bottom, anybody who has heard, or some of us are even old enough to remember Alan Watts, wrote something called The Wisdom of Insecurity. And you don't have to read it, because if you can deal with the title, that's pretty much the lesson that it is teaching. Well, that was out of order, which I apologize. Now we get Paracelsus again. We'll see him once more. I use him to say goodbye. And there's that. I'll bet the slide turns up, and I probably put it in the wrong place. Anyway, I conceive of a globe where science is at one pole and believing the impossible is at the other pole. Because I wanted this two-dimensional structure. I didn't want the linear structure. That's why I used the globe. People are somewhere in between. None of us are 100% physical rules based, and none of us are 100% believing impossible. I was very critical of believing the impossible until somebody threw the word hope at me. And that's all I'm going to do. But it is not, I don't live at the South Pole, and neither does anybody. People fall in between. And you're not always in the same place. Different ages, we may get more into believing impossibles or more into science. And having babies matters. As soon as we have children, our position on that globe may change. This you can read, the impersonal nature of science is scary. It isn't influenced by interpersonal relations, money, strength, appearance, and so forth. Science is. And I play with this word is by using this phrase isness. And my point in a lot of this is to say this starts in babyhood, in childhood. And this little games or puzzle some people have seen, I call it the existential puzzle. This is punctuatable. If you haven't seen it before, it looks rather formidable. That is, that, etc. Yes, it's possible, and I don't like teasing. I don't like being teased myself. Therefore, I feel responsible to give you the answer, which I hope is the next slide. Wait a minute. That's the slide. Yeah, there it is. That is, that is not. This is the polarity. It either is or it isn't. And to a baby, that's it. There's no in-betweens. He doesn't understand or she doesn't understand. I looked for the origin of this, and I found that is goes back to Shakespeare. So this is, I can easily say, nothing new. Now in infancy, we don't understand things. Everything is supplied. And this, parents or caretakers are all powerful. They give food, they give warmth, and that's pretty much all the baby needs, but not for long. The next line that says, let him cry versus pick him up. We soon, I speak, one of my qualifications to talk, I think, is being a parent, because being a parent teaches you a lot of things that maybe I think you should learn in school. We get sex education, but we don't get parental education, or maybe now they do. Anyway, there was this big discussion among parents. When the baby cries at night, do you let him cry or you pick him up? There is no one answer, but this is one of the first points where a child learns that he can't always get what he wants, and he doesn't always get it right away, or maybe he does, and then that conditions him to get it right away. We learn things are manageable, we learn judgment, we learn understanding, but sometimes we need to believe the impossible to survive. Yes, the food will come, or yes, the rain will stop. Now, that was my scrolling wrong. Yeah, my children, I should say, had a German-speaking mother at the time who learned this as a child, and every night would recite this or with the child. And I'm responsible for the translation. If anybody finds an error, let me know by fax or chat or something. But the point is this is extremely magical, in not just by saying, forgive me, loving God. Look at the difference. It's my little eyes, Äuglein, versus God, the Father's big standard eyes, Augen. But there's the differentiation made here, and there's a differentiation made here, big and small. And I had a little trouble translating the word befohlen. It has many meanings. But in this case, I think it refers to the protection, that you, the little child, are accepting the protection of an almighty, Allmightty, and I can go to sleep now. It relieves the anxiety of letting go. We eventually learn, and I relate things to belonging. Oh yeah, here, I figured I got it in. We believe what we want to be true, and we do what we need to do to belong. Because belonging is protection. One of the reasons I stuck that little poem in. Belonging is protection, and it may first just belong to the family, or maybe no family, which is a problem in itself. And physical rules don't matter. That's logical too, because it's logical to feel comforted. It's logical to feel responded to. That surprised me when I thought about it that way. Maybe it surprises you. But I'm not only looking for scientific logic, I'm looking for psychological or emotional logic. And there it starts in babyhood. And that's my primary point of departure for all of this. There are a few more slides. In middle years, there's the stability mutation tension, which you may or may not have heard of. The school or parents are the anchor, and the personal freedom, which is a mutation. You want to do things for yourself. And most of us balance. And these things drive evolution without any change at all, without any mutation. You can give the biological analogy that there wouldn't be any change, except the mutations. Some of them are successful, and you can go to that definition. What's happening now is the rate of change is beginning to matter, not just change. In old age, we start questioning again, and we may deviate from past behavior. We have newly perceived freedom, which I define as children gone, retirement, or recognition. This is as far as I'm going to go. And some of us are demented slightly, like I can't always remember names, or seriously, where am I? Or both. This is quantitative. This is not you either are or you aren't, or at least I think so. Okay, now the 3 5s. This is kind of a long ending. I'm playing with the number 5. This is a round. It's music written by Henry Purcell, and you can read it. And it's just the justification of drinking. I'm not quite sure what they mean by and by, but it's a reason. And I won't sing it now for time reasons, of course. But if anybody really wants it or wants to know where, I've got the lyrics and the melody. And you may be a Purcell 1650 to 1690. You may be a fan of that era. Anyway, that's one. The next 5 is 5 reasons we eat or reject food and drink. This is my own essay, which I did some years ago. It places biological maybe first, because without eating or drinking, there is no others. But it recognizes that there are many, many reasons we take in or reject, and that can be just as important as what we take in, beverages and foods. I'll leave this again for you to read later if you want to get the slides. And again, questions on this are welcome. Then the third 5 is really where I'm leading up to, and the reasons to resist science. One is the connection to big corporations. The second is environmental, relation to fossil fuel. All of these have arguments pro and con, and I list a few of them here. The third is what's unnatural and synthetic. That's one of the easiest ones to apparently destroy, because we have a lot of unnatural poisons. Start with a virus and keep going. And we have a lot of synthetic things that what I call them, beneficial, medicines, pasteurizing, even baking bread keeps it from spoiling. And we support them, but they are not unnatural. I asked the question why, because I'm not sure. Why this obsessive, supported, desired differentiation, polarization of unnatural and synthetic. And science being the way we synthesize things is on this side. But also, as a scientist, I recognize I've said it. Let me go on. Now, the last one is the relevance to relationships, those things I mentioned before. Science is in that there are rules, and the rules hold for everybody. You can't change them with any of these things, the interpersonal relationships, the money, the position, age, strength, other things that we use. But we use them all the time to manage our lives. They are important.
Hold on, we're gonna mute Al.
What is that?
Okay, got him.
Oh, okay. So I can go on.
Yes.
I didn't understand it. Okay. Science denies the impossibles, but we need them to distract from the isness. That's kind of a capsule. Mystery, okay. Magic, no. Except that people need magic. And I only have 4 of these, but because of the personal round, any other reason why, I stuck it in here so I could have 5. Those are the 3 5s. Oh, that's a blank. That's probably the one that is missing that I recapped. A story doesn't have to be true to be useful. I just got an ad a couple of days ago, a spam saying, use the Exodus diet, eat what Moses ate, and he lived 120 years. Well, that's okay. Traditional songs tell stories too, and I found at least 2 melodies that had the word scientific in it, so I thought I'd put them in. This is an Irish folk song where for some reason the man is rubbing and scrubbing. Sure, I caught the death of cold. That's a scientific purpose, as my body it was sold. And this is the working man's thought of the word scientific. That's what they do. They, not him. And the purposes are okay, sort of. Anyway, that's the song, goes back to 66. And Gilbert and Sullivan, whom I'm sure all of us know some of, has, it's Kadisha and Coco at the end, recognizing the natural beauty. There's beauty in the bellow of the blast. There's grandeur in the growling of the gale. Look at the last line. But to him who's scientific, there is nothing that's terrific in the falling of a flight of thunderbolts. This is after this whole description of all the beauties in nature, tigers, lions, volcanoes, and even earthquakes, which is no joke to us. But to him who's scientific, is the thunderbolts fall, that's rules. And that's what Gilbert thought his audience would feel. So I stuck that in there and say things haven't changed. The audience today feels, so what's the big deal if the thunderbolts fall? Whatever that might mean to him. Nature is nature, it is. That's about all. I do have an appendix that I'll tell you about, but I have to say goodbye. I have to bring Paracelsus back. And what I didn't put in, there's another slide. I'm sorry, they're in somewhere. This computer never really loses things. It kind of puts them under seats and under the car seats and things like that. And eventually I'll find it. But what it is a description of the appendix, which I'll describe. Appendix is 6 slides. First one is me and a box of plastic, or plastic material, which is where my career has been and which I understand. But I wanted to give you some pictures of it is real, it is not imaginable, imaginary, it is. And it's often sold in these corrugated boxes with liners. The next is a picture of a machine. How do I get that? Click on it, doesn't happen. Double click.
No, you're on that one.
You're in that one, Alan. Go to the next one.
Maybe that's why I thought I was. Oh, that's right. I see 2 pics, and that's Paris. See, the beginnings of dementia. And if I live till 100, I'll have a little more dementia. These are the chemistry slides for non-chemists, where the atoms are depicted simply as little figurines, little cartoons. Hydrogen has 1 hand, oxygen has 2, nitrogen has 3. You see where I was going with the 3 hands and 4 hands before. And carbon, the basics of all living, and some dead chemistry has 4. Now I go down to the next one. And this is how they form molecules, and you have water and you have carbon dioxide. It's something that we can tangibly recognize. And the oxygens and the hydrogens go around in twosies. And string all the carbons together and put hydrogens on them, and you have polyethylene. And this is what most of our flexible film is, and lots of other stuff, irrigation hose, and I won't go on to the applications. But this is a simple molecule, very similar to the molecule in fats, yet people are terrified because it's plastic. Yeah, the next one is a machine that is used, you can't see it, but it makes corrugated hoses. I picked 2 that are related to COVID because maybe it would make more sense. This one makes the corrugated hoses that would be used in ventilators. It's a real machine. It's got dials. You can measure how hot it is inside and so forth. There's a motor that turns it. Material is fed in here through air conveying, so forth. The last one is looks a little simpler. That's a film blowing system, which would be making the film that would be used in this PPE or protective, personal protective equipment. And you can cut that up and weld it, sew it, things like that. All of our Ziploc bags are made from stuff like this. And at the end, I had a final slide. Let's see. There's something here. Maybe there isn't. I can't click it. Anyway, the final slide said, thank you for attending and listening. And if you want the slides, let me know, or anybody in Ashby, and I can hold this up. I do this again. This is my email. I'm not holding it upside down. Oh, can you see it now?
Yeah,
No,
a little bit farther back from it.
well, not, is it okay?
Not okay.
Oh,
Now
wait a
it is.
minute,
Yeah.
I can see it actually in my thing.
Yes, that's good.
All right. And if in doubt, doubt, it's good. Good for you. Anybody, that's one of my proverbs too. Anybody who wants to be, who's afraid to be double checked should be. How close did I get to? Yeah, about 30 minutes since we started late. So for me, that's a good meeting of my aim. And I never quite forget the numbers. I don't always obey them. Now I can unshare the screen, right? Unless somebody wants a slide. Yes. You are screen sharing, stop share. And I can put the gallery up, and I can, oh, it is up on the left. Yeah. And I can look for hands. Well, I can
Allan Griff has her hand up.
Okay, well, I can't see it on, oh yeah, I see.
Oh, there I am. Okay, thanks for your talk. That was really interesting. And one of the things that I was wondering when you talked about the globe and the polarizations is where uncertainty fits in, because I think a lot of the problem with science as it's perceived by the general public is that it's in process, it's becoming, but it's not, the final word isn't in yet. It never will be, because the information keeps growing and changing. And so the people who are opposed to science can always present an opposing argument to a scientific fact, or at least something that they claim is an opposing argument and also a fact, which then lends uncertainty to the whole thing. And so it's easy then for people to be manipulated.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why this, I've got to get the slide that I spoke about, which talked about proportion and probability in, because that's where probability comes in. I could argue with a person who says that to me and say, do you know the difference? I can be a wise guy and say, you know the difference between a human and a fetus? The fetus is becoming, the human already is. So I would get quite angrily stopped by the kind of person who would be a science denier. I wouldn't use that argument, but I could use it here, because to be changing doesn't mean that you are undeveloped. To be changing might be very well developed, very well authorized, and still welcoming change because nothing is complete. And this is the wisdom of uncertainty. Your life isn't finished until it's over, but an awful lot is lived. That's an argument I could use with somebody like that. Because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but you did know what happened yesterday, and you can act on it, and you can respond to it, etc. It's an example of avoiding numbers, to me anyway, avoiding probability.
Well, Alan,
Yeah,
on Anne Grove's example, or maybe it was your response, the fetus. So you don't think that the fetus is a human?
Oh, I shouldn't have said it that way. Yes, it is human, and I recognize this is the takeoff for a lot of arguments. It's human, or in a gorilla, it's a gorilla. I recognize those things, but it is not functioning in society. It is not interacting with other humans except its mother, or its bearer at that point. I picked that because I knew it would be a controversial thing to a science denier, but they'll define that to satisfy their needs, which is to believe that the impossible is possible. And to disprove that is very, very difficult, but I will refuse to accept that change implies the worthlessness of what has happened until that point.
Susan has a question, and Susan, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Good, thank you.
This is a simple question, but of that polymer chain, what were the pieces of it? They were all the same.
Well, they're all carbon atoms with hydrogen. Polyethylene is that. That's all polyethylene is. It's the simplest plastic. It's a long string of carbon atoms, many more than in our well, plants are a little bit, some of them are the same. It's more like an oil molecule than a protein molecule. Protein resembles nylon because of the ends and the nitrogens in them. I mean, that's into the details, but they're not really complicated molecules compared to some of the medicinal stuff. When I get the chance, which isn't often, to deal with simple and complicated, my example is hemoglobin, which again, if any of you are familiar with, is a pretty complicated molecule with carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, and an iron atom in the middle, unless you're a certain kind of a crab in which it's a copper atom, but that's really irrelevant to what I'm saying. And then I show carbon monoxide, one carbon, one oxygen. And I say this one, the complicated one keeps you alive, and the simple one, the CO, can kill you. It doesn't matter, they've got their minds made up. Complicated is bad and simple is good. But to anybody who knows the biology, and certainly all of you should know that carbon monoxide can kill you and hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen around to your muscles, it makes sense. So he's right or she or that person is right in terms of his own perception and feeling. Complicated in terms of what he's seen, he can't understand, she can't understand, I got to use more theys now. I'm too old to automatically they my words, but I tried.
Alan, you've got two hands up, Gretchen and Roger.
All right, I will, I have to look more closely. See, I'm leaning toward it.
Okay, how about Gretchen?
Hi, Alan. This is actually Gail, Gretchen's daughter.
Oh, sorry.
I come from a marketing background, and right now the importance of selling science, super important. It would allow us to get people to mask up and do other things that would keep our society safer at this challenging time. And I've been wondering on how you sell the science. And your point number 4, which was science denies the impossible, which you defined as hope. I think that might be a key to why this sale is really hard. And I'm wondering if you could expand on some thoughts you have around that.
Well, I can give you a few. I didn't define the impossible as hope, but I kind of analogized or whatever. I link to them because the words are often used one way or the other. In fact, if you have hope, you don't talk about it being impossible. Everything is possible, or you never can tell. A lot of phrases go in there. And I think from a marketing point of view, the communications, the audience and contact and I guess communications is the thing. The ability to communicate is so exponentially blown out of anything that we learned years and years ago. Things go viral in a day, and they go viral to lots and lots and lots and lots of people. Maybe that's what going viral is. That's a challenge. Usually you'd know your audience. If you put a commercial on the radio, you know the kind of people who were going to look on that program. But today, anything can be picked up and sent around. And if you can market and aim at your audience, wow, it's not easy. I don't know that I answered or responded to anything I can remember. Anything else I can remember? Yeah. Oh, the idea of selling science. Yeah, I think it needs a sale, but it needs a sale in terms that the buyer can understand, which is why I wouldn't use any controversial examples to somebody I'm trying to convince what kind of thing I was talking about before. I'm trying to ask myself, what is digestible from a marketing point of view? I don't mean food. What is digestible by the needs of the persons we are trying to convince? And I don't quite know. I know some answers, but I don't think that's too much time. But my answer specifically is thinking of whom you're trying to convince and talk in terms that is digestible by them. I see another. Okay, I'll go to whoever.
Roger's got a
outlined.
hand up.
Yeah, call on people because I can't see them too well.
Okay, Roger, you're up next.
Okay. So following up on what Gail said about selling science, I've been really struck lately with the people who are talking about their response, to the coronavirus and what their state is doing. And if you go on the news, you'll have a governor or a mayor or a public health official or somebody, and they'll say, well, we're following the science, And so you have to let science take the lead. Our governor says it all the time, we're following the numbers. And so that's an appeal to lend more authority. Is to say, you can follow me because I'm following the science. This is an attempt to establish their authority. But what I've been noticing is that they may well have opposite conclusions. In other words, just saying science is supposed to give you more credibility, but so I guess what I think it ends up with is that the whole thing becomes very politicized. And so it's very, very striking that we have these different responses in different states and different localities and different political parties, and that they all claim that they're following the science, but they're all doing different things. So, what kind of an arbiter is there? Any kind of a?
I don't know. I agree with your observation. And back in one of my early slides, I had two things. One is that we need to belong. Belonging gives us a sense of security. And the second thing is that we believe what we want to be true. And both of them are operative there. And you won't get in certain communities people. It's the conclusion, the result that matters. If it is whether the school is open, it's whether the factory is open, it's whether the people are getting paid every week, and people will make their judgments based on where the group that they're involved in there. And the science, this particular situation is funny because it also depends on age. I'm afraid to go outside, but my daughter in New York City did, and actually did get sick and did recover. And was it worth it? I don't know. But people's attitudes are, most of us are going to recover, and other people, we're going to die from other things anyway. And there's a lot of religious philosophy or religious-based attitudes in this. Everybody defines God and gods differently, but they all will say, all right, there's a supreme power somewhere. What it is, try to define it, you'll get many different ones. But
I
that's
think
a little deviating from your question.
this is a case of fear. I mean, we're all, especially
A lot of it is fear.
Especially the older people are more afraid of the disease than the younger people are.
That's right. Tell me
And
about
people in different parts of the country are more afraid of it than people in other parts of the country.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I would try to emphasize, and you get, I can see a pushback on this too. The question of, you can carry this disease and not know it. You can be a recovered person. You can be an unaffected person, but you're killing the old people if you talk to them. And the response to that, there are several. One, of course, is I don't want to do that. Another is that's natural selection. We live longer than we ever did before, or we don't need them anymore. And that's true, or it seems to be true, in the way that people used to need the older people to teach them how to farm and how to weld and how to ride a horse and whatever. Those skills and how to run computers. I learn about computers from my kids, some of them, if they have the time to talk to me. And that's reverse of what it used to be. I was the teacher, and now I become a pupil. What good are we? Well, do we have to justify our existence by having a useful function? I'm not going to answer that. To some people, yes, some people, no. Sometimes the function is keep the parents alive so they can invest and earn more money for us. That's maybe a cruel way of saying it, but there are children who partially think that way. And others say that anything I can do to prolong their lives, I will. So the role of older people is different in different people's eyes. And the law is supposed to coordinate that. So the governor says, "Ba," we all ba.
Well, I remember from, I don't know which, way back when I was in college, I think it was, that I took a course in the history of science. And one of the points that they made was that people can be more objective and scientific about things that are farther away. And so in culture after culture, you find that the first science is astronomy, because there's a regularity in the stars and in the moon and the sun and so on that people observe, and they can be more objective about it. There's more sort of objective knowledge that people can agree on. And that as time goes along, that the science progresses closer and closer to our feelings and our fears and our inner selves. And so it's relatively easier to be objective about, let's say, physics, so physics could come along, or chemistry. But once you start getting into things like psychology and anthropology and cultural studies and things that are threatening or confirming or fearful for people, it becomes harder to be objective and harder to get intersubjectivity where people agree that what are the facts.
I agree, and it's harder to quantify.
Yeah.
How can you make comparisons and balances between a particular scientific fact and a particular fear? And I don't suggest that I can do it, but all I need to do is recognize that balance is possible, and that this isn't a seesaw where you're sitting at one end and you're so heavy that the other end doesn't count. Object is to get a balance, and it's certainly difficult. I squirm when I even think of what you brought up, but you have to bring it up. I do. Anyway, and part of the philosophy behind what I've been saying is look at the other side. They're not all idiots. It is common and almost, I don't know, I wouldn't say standard, but very, very common. I read comments on news articles, and I get as much from the comments on them as from the article itself. And many of the comments call other commenters names that are allowed by whatever the medium is, but apparently moron and idiot are permitted. And lots of people call other people morons and idiots. And that to me starts to disqualify the thing that they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the other side, but I also know they're afraid to look at the other side. And I agree on the astronomy thing, by the way, and it helped astronomy to be useful in navigation.
Yeah.
So that we had this, unless you believe the stars actually control us. And I had an astrologer type friend who said, no, they don't control you, but time does. And at least his theory is that if you know what time you were born or what time you're doing certain things, the stars are in a certain position, and that will govern. I'm far too much of a scientist to believe it, but I got a little scared when he was able to predict my birth hour within about 15 minutes. Now this is, but I can't devote my life to that, nail my life on that belief. So I have to cast it aside. It's one of the imperfect or uncertainties.
I think Anne's got her hand up again, Audrey.
Anne, go ahead.
Thanks. There's a psychological term called cognitive dissonance,
Mm-hmm.
which basically means that if you have a certain belief that or believe a certain fact to be true and somebody gives you evidence to the contrary, it creates a certain tension, and your impulse usually is to reject it. That because it creates this tension that they call cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, no, you've explained it clear. Yes.
And so I think that that's part of why people don't want to hear something that challenges their original belief, and they tend not to listen to it. And I'm certainly guilty of that. I don't watch Fox News, and and I imagine that I listen to my own echo chamber as much as anybody else does, and believe the people who agree with me more than I believe the people who don't agree with me. And I think that's a problem in terms of the selling of ideas that somebody mentioned before, the influencing.
And can I question you to say a little more about that? Can you say why do you not believe Fox News, for example?
Well, I think the theory of cognitive dissonance is that if I hear something that I disagree with, it creates a tension inside me. It creates a conflict, basically. I believe this, and somebody else is telling me that what I believe is wrong. Mm-hmm. And my natural impulse, my human nature impulse, is to reject it because I don't want to be in that state of conflict. Mm-hmm. I'd rather think that I'm right and that other person is wrong.
So your original sources, you learned or you developed a worldview or something, mm-hmm. and then and you have confidence in that,
right?
And then when somebody presents something that is against that view, but right. Probably there are occasions when somebody presents something to you that is different, but you think, oh, that's a good point of view. I never thought of that.
Yes.
And so how do you reconcile that? It's not just anything that's new or different or that you never thought of before.
Right. I think that's a really good point, that what we need to do if we're trying to influence people is find that thing that people will listen to and allow their minds to be opened up by. And I'm, maybe certainly people do change their minds, but how? How do we do that?
And how much? I'm a little scared of everybody changing their minds. There's plenty of science fiction about technocracies and people who make decisions, and everybody somehow follows them or is radioed to follow them. I'm not sure that's what I want. I don't know what I want. except I know what I don't want. That's separate.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think that it has something to do with the whole question of security.
yes,
And I think if it makes you insecure to adopt a new point of view, then you're going to be more reluctant. But I think one of the interesting things in the current situation is that we expect our leaders to help us feel secure, and when somebody botches the handling of a pandemic so badly, we feel insecure about that government. We just think, gosh, these guys don't know what to do, and they wouldn't do it if they did know what to do. And
that's the key. That's to me more their ignorance of something we haven't had before, to a certain extent, is forgivable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not following the science, which I happen to be on the science side, but I can see the
Mm-hmm.
fear on the other side.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, if somebody's giving you magical solutions and you don't believe in magic, and then how can you continue to believe in I mean, the government exists because people support it. And it's very interesting how much support Trump is losing and what are the reasons. And I think one of the big reasons is that people don't feel, I mean, I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about people who are kind of like the swing people in between,
Yeah.
that they feel less secure now that it's clear that what he's doing isn't working, or what he isn't doing isn't working.
Yeah, if that serves to bring him down, my feeling is that they're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. I don't think that's a big enough reason, except if it works, because there's so much more than just in terms of messing up and not leading and following.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more that has been done, but that isn't as easily. It's more long-term. Climate change is an example. It's more long-term. It's harder to convince people, do we really need that? And should we give up this, that, or the other? Usually, and that gets more political, which I agree with you, it's important. But if the botching of the virus mess is seen as that, and if they lose people in their family, or they lose work, or and if he's seen as the leader who could have done something.
Yeah, Alan, I see Charlie's hand is up.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, this question of biases and not believing facts and so forth is one that's interested me for years, and I've seen it happening within psychology, which is my field. Back in the 60s and 70s, a prominent psychologist, Robert Rosenthal, came up with the notion of experimenter bias. Psychology modeled itself on physics. These are subjects, we apply an independent variable to them, we observe the result and all that, and thus we find out the facts. And Rosenthal did experiments, for instance, where if you tell a teacher that certain students in their class are gifted and the others aren't, the gifted ones end up doing better at the end, even though the teacher would not say, well, I treated them better, or something like that. And some very interesting experiments came out to show that this can produce most of the effect in a psychology experiment. To my amazement, psychology's awareness of this biasing problem disappeared within 3 or 4 years. Nobody talks about it anymore. I think the idea that we were not totally objective scientists, only going by the facts and reasoning logically, was so threatening to our attempt to be real scientists that the problem was repressed. But that's not the way to solve it. I used to try to teach graduate students, if you're doing psychological work, it's important to try to figure out what are your biases and how could they apply to experiments that you're doing, instead of just assuming that you have no biases. When you think you have none, they can run full blast.
Well, I tried to think of what were my anti-science biases. And I couldn't think of any. So this is kind of embarrassing, because I know I must have biases that are anti-science. So, I don't know, point them out.
Well, I think there's been, I've read a lot of stories lately about people who did studies, and I always like it when they start out by saying, we entered into this thinking that this is what we were going to find.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's a really good thing to start with, is to say, what did you expect? And if they found something that was different, of course, that's even better, because then they were able to recognize that they were wrong in the first place and that they did need to get the data. But I think that everybody starts out with some idea, or they're hoping to find something, or they're afraid of finding something, or there's some that, which is a bias, I guess you could call it.
I have a lot of faith that in the long run, the process of science gets us theories and understandings which are more and more in line with what the facts actually are. But the long run can sometimes take a long time, especially, if you won't get promoted unless you get that kind of experimental result, which everybody knows is the right one, so forth and so on. But we don't teach people, by and large, to even notice whether they have biases. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I know in anthropology, well, let's see, Anne, give Anne a chance to weigh in.
You can finish your thought, Roger.
Well, I was just going to say that in my field, anthropology, one of the things that was a big bugaboo was where the different races have different levels of intelligence. And of course, anthropologists say, oh, well, no, it's all relative, and that everybody's starts out the same, But the thing that I thought was lacking was that you couldn't investigate that question. It's not a valid question to investigate. And so, well, okay, I can see for social and political reasons, what answer could you get that would be helpful? Probably no answer would be helpful. So, you have this bias of what you want to find, and if you don't find it, then you cover up the results or whatever, So I'm just saying that there's this huge social aspect to what kinds of questions get raised, and that there's a lot of questions that we either don't think of, or if we think of them, we say, no, we can't look into that. It isn't like people can just investigate anything.
One of the main things I learned from the anthropology classes I took in college was the amazing fact that we don't realize we're a tribe with funny beliefs too. It's only all those others that have funny beliefs. Really?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
So Anne has her hand up.
Yeah, so I'm being reminded of the documentary that came out, I don't know, a decade or so ago by Michael Moore called Merchants of Doubt, where he talked about the tobacco companies and how they were able to take down the scientific arguments, valid arguments that cigarette smoking was harmful to humans. And they did this by creating a sense of doubt, by having an expert from the other side come in and say, well, there's no proof. Some people think that it's harmful. Some people think that some experts think it's harmful. Some experts think it's not. And that was enough to make people discount the science, because there was a question of whether it was really accurate or really good science. And maybe it's an interesting example for another reason too, which is that people did change their minds about that. I mean, I can remember when everybody who was cool smoked, and now it's very uncool to smoke. And what did we do to make that change happen? I think it was partly the social, stigma that began to be apparent, and so on. But how was that created? Because if we could do the same thing about mask wearing, where it was really uncool not to wear a mask, I think we'd have a lot of people believing that masks are helpful.
I want to answer that a little bit, having lived through that era, and maybe it isn't as common an explanation. But I think that the purpose of smoking was one of the few things left that people could do before the 60s. And they would perhaps call it liberation, but the expansion of behavior, permissible behavior in the 60s made smoking less significant, easier to give up because there were other things to do. Certainly the advent of easy birth control mattered. Maybe the primary factor, I don't know, somebody else can study that. But things changed around smoking, and smoking was left in the rear view mirror. There may be other things too, but I don't think that science was suddenly brought up as now a great thing to worship.
Well, Anne, we had the same kind of thing happen in evolution studies with the creationists, that the creationists' motto has been for a long time, teach the controversy. In other words, teach that it's controversial. In other words, evolution is just a theory. And Darwin is just one person who thought of something, and all these other people who are chasing after him are just a bunch of cultists or something.
And Paracelsus says probability. I'm sorry.
And there is another side, and there's experts on the other side, and evolution is just a theory, so you don't have to believe it. In fact, you don't even have to teach it in your school if you don't want to, because hey, we got a lot of other theories we could talk about. So that was their motto, was teach the controversy. And that's where I think we see that every day with NPR, with PBS, which, I like to watch the NewsHour, and, they're under a lot of political pressure to have both sides on there, Republican. And so, if Trump says something that's totally ridiculous, a lot of the media feel that they have to report it, and then there may be some fact checking. But I can remember that when Trump was first getting started, they were bending over backwards to say, well, he's got another point of view, and we have to report this, that it's equally likely, or somebody, well, baloney, if he's telling a lie, that's a lie. And so it's gradually gotten to where I think the press is more willing to point it out. There's all this fact checking, and they count up how many lies he's told over the last 4 years, and it's some huge number. But it's that if you're going to have a teach the controversy mantra, then you can take whatever extreme position you want to take, and then it'll have to be included.
Well, one of the things, Allan, when I read your letter that you published to all of us, and you said, well, plastics aren't bad because they're inert. They don't react with anything. And so then my thought was, well, wait a minute. It's not so much that I'm not against plastics in general. I'm against the environmental effects of plastic, which are that they clog up things, which I mean by not mess up things, but clog up things. Like they get stuck in drains, and they get stuck in arteries, and they get stuck in capillaries and digestive systems and stuff.
They get stuck in drains. They do not get stuck in arteries. They have to be digested to get into the arteries. There is a biological block there. But I happen to agree with you. There's lots of bad things.
Right.
Maybe
they block up your intestines. Or
how do they get into our intestines? They'd go right through my intestines.
Well, maybe. See, maybe.
Right. How many in 1,000? What are the probabilities?
Maybe you're talking about your intestines, but I'm talking about a very tiny organism's intestines. There's little teeny tiny intestines that might get bollocked up by a teeny tiny particulate.
I agree with you, and you may surprise some of my industry people, and don't record me and telling them. I would like to see much less plastic used, and I would like to see much less of everything else used.
Yeah.
It's the differentiation and the unscientific arguments used to differentiate that bother me. We worry about fish, and we eat millions of them. And we have
that what I was just getting at is not so much the specifics of this issue, but it is that I thought of something that I thought had not been thought of by the person, you, who were saying that plastics are generally good. And so I'm thinking, well, yes, from that point of reactivity, plastics are inert. I can agree with that. But the fact is that these particulates get in our airways. They block alveoli. You know, they're little things that perhaps were not looked at. And I think that when it's complicated to look at everything, you know, when you're making a point.
So
So-
experimental bias gets us out of that. And I have read, and you sent me, and others sent me, and I know the literature because it's a common recent argument about plastics in the air. And when you look at the numbers, you get some interesting information, and they don't say anything about the other fibers in the air. Most of it is fiber, most of it's polyester, and they don't say anything about wool in the air or cotton in the air or these other
They
very
say
popular,
other particulate matter.
other particulate matter.
Yeah.
And then they say that 2 or 4%, I forget the number, very small percentage of the particulate matter in the air is polymeric in any way at all. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't take more care, and I agree with that, even if we are 5% of the world's population or whatever. I want to be a leader and not a follower in that. But when the numbers are selective to prove a preconceived notion, and why preconceived, that's what my 4 points were about, then I look at that and I say, I'm not surprised, but I don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers were selectively or experimentally biased. The experiment, one of those papers was very good. I mean, in the sense of scientific.
I guess I have to admit that here's a place where I believe that there's something wrong with plastics, that some plastics cause trouble. And so I would like to reduce the use of those plastics. Now, am I going against science?
You might be going with science because there is trouble that can be caused by any materials, all materials, but the degree of distortion is astronomical. Maybe that's not a good word because we can talk about stars, but it's very, very big. The fact that well, I don't know. I don't want to start arguing pros and cons because much work has been done, but proportionally weighing, balancing, and you can't, people, not you, are much more, just to recognize that there are different kinds matters. Material, you talk to people, when we used to fly on airplanes, sitting next to me in an airplane seat was dangerous because I might get a conversation going. And I was interested in what people were thinking. And I got very interesting to me. You would ask, they would come up with the same memes. You put a plastic bottle in the back of a car and something leaches out. What is it that leaches out and how is it harmful? Well, I don't know. They don't know that, and they will squirm if I ask them that, so I don't bother asking. I just see the image in the person's mind of this material with something going from it into the water. They will take that bottle of water and drink from it, put it back, and 2 days later, it was in the hot sun, and the bacteria that their own mouth put in the water will have multiplied. I wouldn't drink it either, but not for the same reasons. But you can't argue that with a person who isn't already scientifically, oriented, looking, understanding and accepting evidence. They are convinced. There is the concept of miracles and magic. One of the things that didn't get, it was on my slide that I didn't have, was the phrase that about miracles, that the more astounding, the more remarkable the miracle, the more powerful the miracle doer. So you believe in astounding things to give power to the person, or not person in this case, the concept of God, if you will. It doesn't have to be God, but the concept that you feel comfortable with and belonging to.
Thank you, Alan. Rhoda has her hand up.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for seeing
So-
the hands. When
so
you see
one
me
of the-
lean back, like I can't. see
Hi. So one of the numbers that I've been seeing is just that in the last century, just the production and application of plastics across the world has increased a lot. I think you can, let me finish, please. And I might be able to use the word exponentially. So they're not agreeing with you that the use of plastics ought to be reduced. It sounds like it's exploding. And my concern with plastic is not so much that it's fake, is that it's immortal. And so, you know, I think there's a concern that there'll be more animals and birds in the waterways that are swallowing little bits of plastic and dying from them, and more airborne plastic as we go along that might eventually get us sick or some animals sick. So, you know, I think there's some need for, I don't know, stepping back a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, but I want to step back from everything. The population of the Earth has been exponentially growing.
Yeah, but we're talking about plastic here, and I'm just thinking
Well,
that one of the things about plastic is that it stays around, you know.
so does stone.
You like the fact that it's
So does Mount
inert, and
Whitney.
it's also, it doesn't break down, so we're always going to have it. And the
Why
more
should-
we make, the more it's going to be there.
All right, suppose we have mountains of inert plastic on every square mile. And if you calculate volumetric, I can give you the numbers if you want or get them. You can get them too. Sure, it's exponentially grown because as of 1909, there wasn't any. So you start from a base of zero. And the big exponential growth coincided with the growth of transportation and the growth of communication after World War II.
Well, what's
So
the point, though? We're talking about
the
plastic
point
in the
is
water and plastic
if-
in the air.
I'm talking about how much.
I'm sorry?
I'm talking about quantity, and I want to relate quantity to effect. I want to follow the numbers. And I want to say that people, as well, I said people exponentially have grown. Do I hear calls to reduce, to increase the mortality of everything in the world so that our population can reduce?
Yes, you're hearing that.
Well, I may contribute to it, but not willingly. I want to see, as a scientist, I would like to see, other than the fear of the synthetic, which was I brought up, I understand that. To me, there is the fear of man. It's men, people, women, us, that we don't trust. This concept of natural says we've lived with natural for 50,000 years or whatever it is, and with a lifespan on the average of 30 and plus or minus, lots of people dying in infancy, but the culture adapted to that. We live in a different, extremely different culture, very fast changing now, and I would like to try to predict what it might be in 10 or 20 years, and I can't. And that's what, if we're talking about reducing, there's a lot of talk now about reducing production, quantity of production, talking about the effect of production on the world, and things that are made up as if they were made up by people who got fired from Fox News. And it doesn't matter because it's feeding the desire of the people to believe those things. It's feeding their comfort level. It's avoiding the scaring. If you talk about electric cars or electric anything, gets people excited, that's going to be better. But if you calculate the amount of energy needed to be generated, yes, it may solve some pollution problems, but it may not save much energy problems. But people don't want to hear it. They don't want to think about it. And for those are good reasons which you're afraid. Fear to me is an acceptable, logical conclusion. It should not be ignored. So is comfort. And so, I want to cut down the use too. It's certainly not the categorical use of plastics, because there's so much more that is done, that is made and that is used to help us. And yes, there are some things that hurt.
So you distinguish between, I forget, frivolous uses and non-frivolous uses. Is
No,
that
I wouldn't say.
That's what you said when you said that in your letter.
Yeah, I know I said that. I used
Oh, okay.
more frivolous and less.
Oh, okay.
Uses that can be more easily done without. But it's hard to convince people who are comfort driven. I think I've maybe talked a lot too much about that. Are any more hands?
Yes,
Can't
yes.
see 'em.
I have
Good.
a hand and Monroe has a hand, and I
Good.
was just going to. Okay, I
I
was
was
just
asked the
going to
question,
say.
so I thought I'd better answer it.
Okay, I just wanted to say that there's some people who have not spoken up, and I want to be sure that after Monroe, that all the people get to say what they are thinking, or what,
Okay.
so on. So Monroe, do you want to go? Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to ask.
Just a
You're
minute,
talking
Al.
about, I
Just a
better.
minute, Al. I'm
Okay,
calling on Monroe.
I just wanted to talk about the fact that the plastic beads that are apparently are heavily found in toothpaste and in materials for cleaning people's faces and cosmetic materials, that's something that we need to get back to a place where people think in terms of costs, all kinds of costs, not just money, and the benefit of it. We really need something that's going to make our teeth whiter that possibly has a possibility of damaging the environment later on. I don't know, but if we don't stop it by the time we discover if there's a problem, it may be too late. That's all. I just throw that out. Thank you.
I'm going to give you like 30-second responses, which may not be complete. I'm more worried about the other stuff in the toothpaste than I am about inert plastic beads. I'm worried about people who put an inch of toothpaste on their toothbrush because it's an inch long, and I don't like the idea of toothbrushing with toothpaste. I use water picks. Dentists will argue against it. I don't even want to start that. There are pluses and minuses to that. Cosmetics, the whole purpose of cosmetics, and the nature of the harm of these beads, to me, is scientifically questionable. But we don't want it because it's artificial.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who has a response to this, who hasn't spoken up yet? Joseph, did you have, yes.
I did. This might be an oversimplification of the problem, but I hear talk about fear and other factors that prevent people from accepting science. If you allow me to screen share, I'd like to show you a comic that I think is apropos to all of this.
You're allowed.
Okay. Can you all see this comic now?
Not yet. Did you select the screen thing?
I believe I did. Let me try it again here.
You shared your screen, and then you picked out one of the squares on there, and you clicked share.
Well, let me just, yes, I did, but let me just describe to you. It is a comic that appeared a few days ago in the Chronicle, in Non Sequitur, and it shows a line of people coming to a door that says answers, and you have two choices. It's a turning point, and on the left, it is people who are choosing the side of simple but wrong, and to the other direction, you can choose complex but right. And there's no surprise to this that the majority of people are turning to the left because it's a simple answer. How do you combat that?
As the general answer, or I can answer that in 10 seconds, impossible, unless the ability to judge and the basis of judgment is given to all those people. And it's more than education. It's the whole mindset. You can't judge a complicated issue without a basis, without knowledge of something. That's my 10 seconds.
But
Well, I'd like to add, oh, go ahead, Joseph.
No, I would just like to say, but the challenge is we somehow have to approach that problem. We somehow have to get through to some of these people. Otherwise, you know how they're going to vote next time.
Well, it's true. People have a different threshold of how much input, what is too much information. And you can't, I don't know that you can bypass that. They don't want any more information.
They're a small cup and you can't fill it. It's already full. This is one of the problems, and I read about this too. Democracy as set up from 1776 or all over where it was not democracy as we have it now, because this has to do with communications. So much is communicated to so many people that don't have the basis for judgment, or that have impetus or reason to judge on one side or another.
Or
It's a
they also
polarization.
are getting more information, from different points of view that you're not getting. Okay, somebody else besides me and Alan and Charlie, go ahead.
Well, of course, there are many people who love this situation that most people are incompetent to judge, because I know the right thing, and if you'll vote for me, I'll lead you folks.
Yeah.
The simpler answer.
So,
Simple but wrong.
Will, how about you?
Yeah, all my life I've observed in high school and college that there's a certain number of people that are scientifically minded, have a talent for science, and that's only like 5 to 10% of the population in my observation. So that the rest of them have to rely on William James's notion that in pragmatism that whatever works is true. And so that's what they have to base their lives on. They have existential needs to survive and work and so on. So they have to proceed on whatever is working for them. And so they base their beliefs on that. So they can make money and have families and whatnot. The other thing is that scientists are kind of an elite and consider themselves elite. Talking about credibility of science, most scientists work for corporations, large corporations, and are interested in making successful careers for themselves. And those corporations are involved in exploiting the planet resources, and that's part of the human agenda. That's what humans have assumed is their role on the planet, is to exploit the resources of the planet. And as a result, we're in this dilemma of overpopulation and overconsumption, greater and greater carbon footprint for every human being on the planet, which means we need like 5, 10 planets to support the human agenda. We can't do that. It's just an endless suicidal trend in the human species.
Thank you. Hillary, are you raising your hand? Okay, let's see. Jeanette, did you have something you wanted to say? And Al, you had something you wanted to say?
I've forgotten what it was now.
Let's see, who has not had a chance? Does everybody feel, with now 4:45, are people ready to call it quits? And if so, I want to, if there's anything else somebody wants to say, please.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan has something.
Yeah, I will give a very short response to the last comment. Maybe because I'm representing corporations, I think to paint them as, to use the trigger word exploit with the same brush, is kind to the bad ones and unfair to the good ones, and not recognizing the efficiency which translates to lower prices and more availability to the mass of the public. Most corporations are not run by their owners, and that's a whole long story. But to treat them all the same, I see as the same as treating all plastics as alike. There are differences, and we should recognize and make good use of the differences.
Thank you. So I'm gonna end the meeting in just a minute before I say that we are very grateful to Alan for leading this discussion. I personally found it very interesting, and I thank you, Alan. That was great. And I thank all of you for participating also, because it was a discussion that was very useful, I think, to hear from everyone. I'd also like to say that each month we try to have a different topic, and you guys are the sources of our topics. So please don't shirk your responsibility to come up with a topic, because we need topics. So please, you can see there are a lot of different ways to do it. It's not hard. You get a lot of help, and everybody's very appreciative, very appreciative. So if you have any inclination at all, please let us know. My email is on the bottom of the calendar thingamajiggy, contact person. So you can send me, and you know, I sent something around begging you to send this notice to your friends, your kids, your uncles and aunts, whoever might have a nice topic to talk about. So please help us out. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everybody. And do not vote for me as planetary leader. I would really screw it up.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Audrey.